Good Mental Health. I'm your host, Matt Kelly. I'm pleased to once again be joined by my co-host and behavior expert, Dr. Neil Marinello. Neil, as always, it's a pleasure to have you on the show and to share this time with your brilliant expertise.
Well, my pleasure.
You are a solutions-focused life coach in Woodstock, Vermont, and I do refer to you as a behavior expert. I think it's important that before we begin, we just touch a little bit about that. Your experience in human behavior spans over half a century and began when you were one of the youngest to enter Harvard Medical School. Is that correct?
Not Harvard Medical School, Harvard College.
Harvard College.
Yeah, I was 16 when I went to Harvard. And there was a 13-year-old in my class, and I had to deal with the part of me that wanted to either hug him or kill him.
Wow. And from that, you've really had experience, whether it be one-on-one individual coaching sessions, but also clinical experience, both in hospital, working in prisons, quite a wide experience dealing with human behavior.
Well, I think that from the time I was quite young, let's say 15 years old, I became fascinated with the idea of exposing myself to as many different kinds of weird people who engaged in weird behaviors as I could. And it started off at Harvard working for Phillips Brooks House, going to Metropolitan State Hospital, which was the state hospital for Massachusetts at the time, and working in the back wards with people who had been diagnosed schizophrenic. Since then, I've worked with every kind of mental disorder and I would say personality disorder that I could find. And my goal has been to understand how people think.
Wonderful. Well, our topic for today is just right up your alley. And, you know, I'm fortunate because I get to pick the topics, but we're drawing directly from your tweets on Twitter. And our audience is invited to follow Neil directly on Twitter. His handle is at Coach Dr. Neil, at Coach Dr. Neil on Twitter. And our subject for today is there is no part of me that is not a part of you, or vice versa, as we should say, there is no part of you that is not a part of me. And Neil, why don't you briefly just take us into the concept, and we'll dig deep as we continue in this discussion.
Sure. I think I began working with this idea many, many years ago when I started to read the science fiction of Theodore Sturgeon, who was a science fiction writer in the 50s and afterwards. And I think, to me, his most famous book was called More Than Human. But his concept was that there would be no wars if everybody was inside everybody else's head. That everybody's got secrets that they don't want anyone else to know. And if those secrets were all exposed, we would all realize we're just, people doing the best we can. The way I translated that into a sermon at our church in the late 90s was to entitle the sermon, No Better Than Hitler, No Worse Than Jesus. And I was using Hitler and Jesus as personifications of what the social constructs call them, evil and good. The idea of it was, though, that there's no part of Hitler that isn't a part of me, and there's no part of Jesus that isn't a part of me. And what I was saying was, we all have chemicals that operate within us, emotions that operate within us, thoughts that operate within us, but there are no bad chemicals, emotions, or thoughts. There are only bad deeds. And the things that we do are the things that we need to take responsibility for. So that's a start. There's many other people that have written about this concept. Debbie Ford was one of the best. She wrote a book called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. And in that book, she talks about how she was really furious with a particular woman who she saw as a true bitch. And then she realized that that woman represented the worst part of herself.
Oh.
And as a result of that, I actually bought a T-shirt, which I use occasionally with my clients, especially the female ones. And here's the T-shirt.
Queen of Denial. Love it. That's great.
Denial is the key to understanding bad behavior.
Hmm.
When people do bad things, it's usually because they're trying to deny the fact that there's a part of them that could be like the person that they're criticizing. And it's happened to me many times. The most recent time, I was watching a situation in which I was watching a DVD that was about Leonard Cohen. And Leonard Cohen is, of course, a magnificent songwriter and one of the best poets and Buddhists that many of us would like to emulate. But in watching this DVD that was a tribute to Leonard Cohen, there was someone named Anthony Hegarty who was singing a song that Leonard Cohen had written called "If It Be Your Will." Mm. And Anthony Hegarty was dressed as a transvestite and was, as he was singing the song, acting very feminine. And it infuriated me. And in my business, if you get any intense emotion about anything, I've got to figure out what's going on with me. Otherwise, I'm not going to be that helpful for other people. So I watched it 10 more times. And about the 8th or 9th time, when I realized I wanted to start throwing things at the TV, I began realizing that whether he was posing as it or whether he was just a very good actor, Anthony was in fact demonstrating to me that he had been exposed to almost the same kind of abuse that I had been exposed to growing up. But he had made the exact opposite decisions. In other words, when I was growing up in the 50s, and I saw and I felt very emasculated by a very powerful Columbia Law School graduate mother. I would watch a Paul Newman movie or a Steve McQueen movie and model my behavior after them. And I realized that in his extremely feminine behavior, Anthony Hegarty had gone the exact opposite way. That every time he had chosen to be more feminine, I had chosen to be more masculine. In other words, using it in Jungian terms, he was my shadow. Mm. And that's why I was furious with him. I refused to recognize that I could just as easily have been him.
I have to say, and this is what I just love about our conversations, it is completely different than what I had interpreted or expected, in essence, our show to be about today. And I kind of want to just share what I was thinking that this would sort of be. And that is that, again, the concept being that there is no part of you that is not a part of me. It has to do with what is transmitted to my cornea that then translates to my amygdala that gets interpreted. And so, for example, if I happen to witness a behavior or I have a reaction to someone, some person, I have to take responsibility for it because it is my mind that has interpreted this, that my eyes, my corneas have actually seen. And so while Neil Marinello is his own individual person, my interaction with you colors my viewpoint of you and has very little to do with who Dr. Neil Marinello actually is. And yet I have to take responsibility for that anger or that fear or whatever emotion comes up because it is my mind that has triggered it. And it is my vision that has seen it. And to give this another way, if you look just into the background around me, you'll see different shapes and different colors and whatnot. And for me, I love that because that's shapes and colors and designs. But somebody else may just view that as a cacophony, if you will, of different colors and things, and it may be very confusing for them and whatnot. But again, I look at it and I see abundance of shape, color, sizes, and interact with that. But somebody else may have a different reaction, and yet I have to take responsibility for my own reaction to what my eyes see and what my brain translates. Therefore, what my eyes see, I have to take responsibility for. And that's why there is no part of you that is not part of me. And that's how I interpreted this question. And yet I just love it because it's different from how you approach this.
Well, it isn't. The truth is that your example is extremely good because uh, the uh, the optical nerves actually reverse images in the brain, and your brain turns it over so it looks up, so it looks right side up. But the term I used last week when we talked was significate. The meaning that you give to what you see is yours and yours alone. And there's a lot of evidence that eyewitness testimony is not very good, because if you have several people that see exactly the same accident from different angles, they'll all tell almost as many different stories about the accident as there are people, because each person interprets it through his own perception. The issue here has to do much more with the difference between the meaning that you give to something you see and whether the effect of that meaning on you results in behavior which is good, bad, or crazy.
Mm.
The difference being good behavior is behavior which in one way or another helps yourself or other people without unnecessarily hurting others. Bad behavior is behavior in which you are purposely hurting yourself or others to make yourself feel better and knowing it. Crazy behavior is behavior in which you are acting, believing something to be true that is not true, not necessarily even understanding that you're hurting yourself or others by doing that.
One other way that I came to this question was to recognize that despite all our differences of hair color, gender, size, shape, sexuality, whatever it is, ultimately we're much more alike than we are different. So again, approaching the topic, there's no part of you that is not a part of me. Coming down to a very basic cellular level, is its own truth, if you will.
Well, that is true, yes. But in the business that I'm in, the issue is much more, what are the parts of myself that I don't want to acknowledge? I don't want to recognize are actually things that exist in me. So many people who behave in evil ways actually are not aware of that. In their own mind, they think they're doing the best they can. But in many cases, they are in fact behaving in ways which are consistent with some distorted perception of reality. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I had many years ago, I had read a report that was written by an expert forensic psychiatrist about a particular patient that he had. He was asked to evaluate that person. This person was in jail, had committed many rapes, and had a pattern of committing rapes that had resulted in his being put in jail, probably for the rest of his life. I met with that person, and after reading the report, and in the report, it basically was talking about how this guy had grown up on a farm and had sex with cows, a fairly disgusting image. The report that was written by the psychiatrist talked about that, and then immediately went into a diagnosis. The diagnosis was antisocial personality disorder, which was a totally appropriate diagnosis. But what I was asking myself was, what's going on inside this guy's head while he's having sex with cows?
Mm.
And is there a way that distorted thought process that he has can be used to stop him from raping people in the future? And it took quite a while for me talking to him to get his trust and to get him talking to me. There's a Netflix series, I think, called Mind Hunter, which talks about how important it is to get inside the head of people who commit horrendous crimes. And once you can do that, the possibility of seeing them as human beings rather than as monsters, which of course their behavior makes them, gives you an opportunity to say, okay, could I do that? Would I be capable of doing that? And what part of me would be capable of doing that?
Mm.
So it's a very interesting process, understanding how people think that gives them permission to do such horrible things. In my own experience, it comes down to the fact that if you refuse to recognize that there's a part of you that's capable of doing something bad, that there's a monster inside your own head that you have to get to know, make friends with, perhaps even accept, the odds that you're going to actually act in horrible ways become much less.
Good mental health. We're speaking with Dr. Neil Marinello. Our topic here today is there is no part of you that is not a part of me. And, you know, this sort of brings up to me the issue of shame. And I feel in a sense that that's sort of what we're kind of talking about here, that if it's something about myself that I don't like, that shame is attached to that. And then as a result, there may be efforts to push that down, which comes out in less productive ways.
Well said. Pushing it down, in fact, is a very good analog, because trying to deny shame is a little like packing a cannon.
Mm.
You refuse to acknowledge that. At some point, there's a chance that it's going to go boom. The reality is that, in my mind anyway, shame is one of the most ignored issues in the field of mental health.
Mm.
The other issue.
And would you also say that it's probably one of the primary drivers of mental health?
Absolutely. I would even say that that shame is an issue which exists in the first year of life.
Mm.
And a child experiences that. I remember reading a woman named Karen Horney, who was a person who had a theory of personality, in which she said every child has two mothers. The mother that changes their diaper when they're hungry, and the mother that gives them milk when they're hungry. And the child, of course, doesn't know how to do anything but cry. So if the child gets the diaper changed when the child's hungry, that's the bad mother. And the child wants to get rid of that mother and just have the one that changes the diaper when the child is wet. The child, however, is totally dependent on the mother and is looking at the mother and sees the face of the mother. And if the child gets the diaper changed when the child is actually hungry, the child sees the expression on mother's face, and that's the bad mother. Of course, the child doesn't know how to do anything but cry. And so you wind up with this situation where the child associates the face of the mother with shame. That and of course there is no real shame in it, but there is from the child's point of view. The child isn't getting what he or she wants.
Wow, wow. One other area that I wanted to kind of extrapolate here on this, you know, having worked with you for a number of years, for full disclosure, I've been a client of Dr. Neil Marinello's going back, you know, to the mid 90s, and seeing you off and on since then. One of the things that you have shared with me, which I see pertinent to today's topic, is putting yourself in someone else's shoes to, for example, if there's about racism, let's just use that as a topic, which is very prevalent here today, the topic of racism. And the way to perhaps understand it is to actually put yourself in the shoes of someone and to actually take their position. And it may be a position that is opposite of your own. And it's only when you're able to do that, that perhaps empathy might be able to be achieved, because you come to it from a different point of view, again, being that there is no part of you that is not a part of me.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the issue of racism has come up, quite intensely lately. And the bottom line on it is that it's pretty hard to get inside the head of somebody who puts his foot on someone else's throat and doesn't lift it. At the same time, it's much easier to get inside the head of the person who's being killed by that. But the objectivity, the process of saying to yourself, what I'm doing is acceptable, is right, is something that that the people who are talking and saying things around me don't know that I'm doing the right thing. Whatever the reality is of the inner thought process, it has nothing to do with the reality of what's happening now. And I can remember a case that I had very early that taught me an awful lot, of a situation where I received a call from a lawyer who said, Dr. Marinello, you've had more experience testifying than anybody else, but I'm not calling you about that. I'm calling you because I have a client who murdered a teenage girl, and he doesn't know why he did it. And he wants you to tell him why. And I said to the lawyer, yeah, right. I don't believe that for a minute. And the lawyer said, no, he's willing to sign anything at all. So you don't have to testify. You don't have to say anything. He just wants to know why he did it. He can't sleep at night, and he knows he's going to jail and he deserves it, but he doesn't understand why. So I had everybody sign a bunch of paper that covered my ass, so I wouldn't have to testify. And it was a fascinating job getting inside this guy's head. I gave him a bunch of tests. I talked to him quite a bit, and it turned out that he was a big guy, but he had in fact been born a twin. By the way, I'm changing some of the facts here so that to protect the
People's
guilty.
identities are kept confidential.
Exactly. Well, to protect the guilty. At any rate, he was a twin, and his twin was a female, and she did very well in school, and he did very poorly. And when he was 8 years old, his mother had started having an affair, and wound up divorcing his father. And his father had to work 3 different jobs in order to pay the child support. And prior to his murdering this teenage girl, he had wound up getting jilted by his girlfriend, and he started on a bender and was drinking and driving around in his pickup truck, and picked up a couple of teenage girls, and who were totally drunk. And he dropped one of them off at her home, and the other one he took to a lover's lane, and tried to have sex with her. And she was too drunk, and he was unsuccessful in having sex with her, kept going back and drinking more beer, and then choked her to death and didn't understand why. And after talking to him for quite a while, I was able to make a guess, and the guess turned out to be on the mark. And the guess was that he killed her to prevent a single thought from entering his head. And that thought was that he wished he was female.
Wow.
And when I said that to him, I had never understood the term blanched before. He literally turned white. And he said, my God, that's why I've been having those dreams. This was the 70s, a long time ago. But the dreams he was having was that he had gone to Sweden and had a sex change operation. He hadn't told
Wow.
anybody that at all.
And would you say that shame was present with him in this as well?
I'd say it was the major factor.
Yeah.
If he hadn't been ashamed of that thought, he might not have killed her.
Mm, mm. You know, as I think about you and your history and whatnot, you've had a great opportunity to get in the head of some pretty, by public standards, despicable individuals,
Absolutely.
and have come to this realization again, there is no part of you that is not a part of me. And so in that, I would assume that you've recognized shame within yourself, and perhaps maybe that was the Anthony Haggerty story and its genesis as well.
Yep. Yep.
And wondering if we could just expound on that a little bit more.
Well, let's keep it personal.
Mm.
It was very hard for me to get inside your head when you took a loaded gun, put it to your heart, and pulled the trigger.
Sure.
At the same time, the state of mind that you were in at that point makes perfect sense to me because of the extreme amount of shame that you were experiencing, the extreme amount of pain that you were experiencing, and the desire to stop it.
Mm.
And that's on a scale of 1 to 10 of suicide attempts, that's a 10.
For sure.
The fact that you're alive is, to me, the presentation of an opportunity, and it comes right up against the meaning of life. Shame and the fact that we're all going to die are, I think, two of the most important forces that are operating for everybody. And the reality is that most people would rather not think about either of those things. And so the process of denying that results in you're wearing the t-shirt. But the truth is that that you survived. And the question is, why did you survive? And if you want to say it's all a bunch of random existential bull, you can say, okay, but that doesn't lead you anywhere. If you want to say, wait a minute, there's got to be a reason why I survived, and let me significate it. Let me give a meaning to it. Let me do something with the rest of my life, like what you've been doing, which is expressing your artistic capacities in various ways and turning yourself into a person who whose talent clearly shows.
And yet we can say even that the impetus for that is shame over that event, and to try to make amends for it and to try to capitalize on it in a way that empowers me and allows me to still be fully creative.
Does that feel right?
Yeah.
What you said just feels right to me.
Yeah.
And so I call it the nickel dropping. And that dates me because in the old days we used to have these Coke machines, and you'd put a nickel in it, and the Coke would come out if you put it in right. If it didn't, you wouldn't hear the nickel drop, and so you'd have to push the coin return, and then spin it a little bit and hope that you can end up getting your Coke that way. But what you just said dropped the nickel for me.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that it had to take such an extreme action on my part, but again, that's wrong thinking, and that will be a topic of another of our future conversations.
Could be considered unfortunate, or it could be considered fortunate. The question
it's
is,
all about signification again.
Yeah, exactly. The question is, why are you alive? And why are some people who attempted suicide at a 2 or a 3 on a scale of 10, why did they die? And the answer could be it's all a bunch of random crap. Or it could be, if you give it meaning, wind up getting a raison d'etre, a reason for living that works for you. It may or may not work for me or for someone else, but it doesn't have to.
And so as we move forward here and we wrap up with our topic, there's no part of you that is not a part of me.
Mhm.
Let's try to encapsulate that here in this regard with myself. How do we as a public try to keep that thought in our forefront rather than in a back recess? Because I would suspect, and as you started out with this in the show, is that if we were able all to probably keep that in our forefront,
Mhm.
there'd probably be less war, less violence, less crime in our communities, and directed towards ourselves.
Yes, I think that it starts with, if you feel strongly about anything, it's worth examining.
Mm.
Anything that you have a strong feeling about. In the AA community, they say, if you spot it, you got it.
Mm.
But we're talking about the fact that very strong emotions are suggestive that you're packing a cannon and trying to not think about something that it would help if you thought about.
And let's be clear here. I mean, the emotion can be glad, sad, mad, happy, sexually stimulated, whatever it is. If it impacts you strongly, it would be wise to unpack it and try to get to a root.
It certainly can be. In terms of emotions, I'm a reductionist. So I used to say there's only four emotions: mad, sad, glad, and scared.
Oh.
At one point in my reductionistic experience, I reduced it to two emotions: mad, scared, and sad, glad, because they are on a continuum. The extreme of scared is panic. The extreme of anger is rage. But they're not miles apart. There's a bridge between those two. And because you can laugh until you cry, there's a bridge between sad and glad also. Any extreme feeling that you have, I believe, is worth understanding, looking at, and saying, is it possible that I'm denying the part of me that feels the opposite? And if so, can I allow that part to exist? The concept here currently is referred to, I think, as radical acceptance, which is the shrink version of love. Loving someone is wanting what's best for them, even if it's not what's best for you. Radical acceptance is accepting that there may be parts of you that you can't stand, that are actually monsters, but that you have to accept and even love those parts of yourself in order to not let them control your behavior so that you wind up doing bad things.
And again, if you're recognizing it or seeing it in somebody else, more than likely it's triggering you because you recognize it, or you're failing to recognize it within yourself. And it's only when you are able to recognize it within yourself and come to a point of, like you just said, radical acceptance, that you will then be able to accept that in somebody else.
Yes, to take it to the logical extreme. Hitler was not Jewish, but there was a part of him that thought like a Jew. And perhaps if he had accepted that part of him, he wouldn't have killed 6 million Jews.
Wow. That's pretty intense.
Well, here's an interesting example. This is a Mont Blanc pen. I'm a pen freak. And this particular pen, what Hitler did was hire someone to make him the best pen in the world. And he hired a Jewish man to do it. And of course, that Jewish man was aware of the fact that Hitler was not a nice guy. He made this pen, and the symbol of the pen is right on the top here. It's what supposedly the snowy cap of Mont Blanc. In fact, if you look at it closely, it's a Jewish star filled in.
Yes, it is. Wow.
a Jew managed to thumb his nose at Hitler by following his orders.
Same time. We've been speaking with Dr. Neil Marinello, behavior expert and solutions-focused life coach out of Woodstock, Vermont. Our topic today has been, there is no part of you that is not a part of me. I want to thank Dr. Neil for his time here today. A reminder that you can follow Dr. Neil directly on Twitter. His handle is at Coach Dr. Neil. And I can personally attest that he's got true nuggets of gold in there. And if you have the opportunity to go through and review what he's written, it will definitely be a thought starter. Our topic for next week is another one that I'm quite excited about. And it follows on exactly what we've been speaking about today. Our topic next week will be, each of us is in our own reality. And we'll follow up with that next week. So on behalf of Dr. Neil Marinello, I'm Matt Kelly. We're both wishing you good mental health.